one of the best things I could do for my career was to go super out of my comfort zone.
Welcome to Behind Their Success. This podcast is for people who are feeling stuck on their entrepreneur journey or in their careers. It's for people who want to scale and grow their businesses, learn about the power of mindset, or they just know there's more out there and they want to start making changes. I'm Peyton Squires, the host of the podcast. I was never cut out to be an employee, and when I was an employee, I was bored out of my mind. So I made a plan. I studied and passed the CPA exam in 8 months while working, all with the end goal in mind of quitting my job and starting my own business. I did that in 2014, and it's been an amazing wild ride since. So now let's hear from other entrepreneurs and what mindsets, and probably more important, what actions they have taken that have created and led to their success. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Behind Their Success podcast. Today we have Jamie Muffett on. Jamie is a voice actor, a podcast producer, audio engineer, and educator who divides his time between New York City and Philadelphia, PA. For the past 10 years, Jamie has lent his voice to thousands of voiceover projects, national commercials in the US and UK, and around the globe. He's been involved in over 60 documentaries, promos for NBC, ESPN, CNBC, Nickelodeon, Reels channel, and also for video games. Jamie has a friendly, reassuring, and flexible voice. He has an authentic British accent, but also can do Scottish, Northern English, Irish, and Cockney accents. Jamie produces and co-hosts the prestigious In the Envelope podcast. Some of the guests have included Natalie Portman, John Krasinski, Henry Winkler, and Seth Meyers. Jamie, good morning. Welcome on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Peyton. I really appreciate you inviting me here today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jamie, I read your bio there a little bit. Give us some more details about your background.
Well, I originally started in music production. I went to school for engineering, and that's how I came into that side of the industry. And I've always liked the sort of tech side of music. I'm a musician as well, but, I've sort of very much in the band. I was sort of the guy who recorded everyone, right? And so I always skewed that way. And I was working in music in the UK. I had my own studio and like a local studio in my sort of hometown, and really enjoyed that. My wife's American, and we came to a sort of crossroads in our life where a few things ended and there was some question marks as to where we were going to go. And we were like, you know what? Let's maybe try America. She spent some time in the UK, and it was sort of only fair to reciprocate. So I moved over to the US, and we moved to New York with literally a couple of bags. And before I moved over, I was like, well, music is a pretty precarious industry, so let me try something else. And because I was able to record myself and had all that experience doing that, I was like, I don't know, maybe voiceover, maybe the Americans like a British guy, maybe that can make some money. So, work with what your mama gave you or whatever that expression is. So I just dipped my toe in the water with it in the UK a few months before coming over. And like that week, I was just booked for a gig. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe this is a thing. And pretty quickly, everything shifted to voiceover. And that became my primary focus. I was still doing music up until about 2016 when we left New York. But now I keep my eye in with production because I've started a podcast production business, RPS. And I've been doing that for many years now. But yeah, so originally started in music production, that shifted to voiceover, and then music production came back in a bit with podcasting, and now I do the two things concurrently.
Interesting. Yeah. So, it's got to be strange, right? Or you're just watching TV or watching different things, and all of a sudden your voice pops up.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Or do you have friends that recognize your voice on some of these things?
Yeah, well, sure. It's funny. I got a text from my sister the other day in the UK, and she was kind of like, after a long day at work, she was kind of on the sofa and she was kind of like almost like dozing off. And then all of a sudden I do the Fanatics ads in the UK for like fan merch for sports and stuff. And she heard me like yelling at the camera. She was like, Jamie, what? And, she was like, oh God, I keep hearing your bloody advert on the TV. She's kind of annoyed by it. No. It is a slightly odd thing for sure. But the thing is, no one likes the sound of their own voice, right? It's pretty normal. I have edited so many thousands of hours of my own voice that I've become I wouldn't say I like it, but I've become ambivalent to it at this point. Unfortunately, hearing myself back is a big part of my week, so it's pretty normal. Yeah, the fact that it's on TV, on radio, or video games or whatever is okay. Yeah. Once it's happened a few times, it's not that special.
Sure.
You know?
Take me back. So you came to America. What was the time frame there?
End of 2009, we moved over.
End of 2009. Okay, so you came here with a few bags and no connections. Like, where'd you start?
Well, we came to New York for a start, so that's obviously a big deal. So I was immediately like straight into the fray. I will name drop a little bit. Back in the UK, I taught the drums. There's another sort of string to my bow I was doing back in the UK. And I got to know Keith Richards' son, Marlon. And he was in New York in the 90s and knew everyone. So he was like, hey, you got to meet this guy. He's the guy. You got to meet this guy. And so when I came over, he connected me and it was great. Like I got to go into studios and I got connections that way. I met musicians and people like that. With voiceover, it was just like, almost hate to say, it was just like the easiest, breeziest entry into a career you could possibly imagine. I sent a few emails and I signed up some online like marketplaces, and I got my agent as a result of like the first email I sent to an agent ever. And she was like, yeah, sure, we'll try you out. Let's see. And being a niche in an industry is a blessing and a curse. There's not the volume of work out there necessarily, but you're also kind of a big fish in a small pond. They didn't have too many Brits on their roster for talent. It was like, yeah, sure, we'll give you a try. And so they'd send me out to auditions, and it took me a while to start booking. But when I did, they were like, okay, this guy's worth investing a bit of time in. And then they signed me up. And it was, I really can't say it was a struggle, quote unquote. What is difficult in this industry is just just going out for so much and not booking most of it. So essentially it's just a bit of a slog that way. You're constantly being sort of, I don't like to use the word rejected, but essentially that's what it is. And so when you're starting out, you're kind of dreadful at it because you don't know what you're doing, and you slowly figure it out as you go along. And I didn't have any training in voiceover. I did a little bit of acting when I was in school, but that's about it. And you just kind of fumble around being dreadful until you're slightly less dreadful.
Right. That's the process.
Yeah. Unless you're a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. But pretty much everyone else has that process, I think, right?
Yeah, and I hear that kind of story, I guess, from a lot of the different entrepreneurs and people I interview, is that, yeah, you're going to be terrible first time, just generally, right? You're not going to be good. No one is. It's very rare for anybody to like be naturally good at something, right? I mean, they may have the genetics that make them, tend towards something, but still at the same time, having to tease that out and grow those skills, that's how everybody has to operate.
And you may have innate skill and quality, but you've got this big sort of barrier of confidence that you have to overcome. And that can really hold you back. And I found whatever innate talent I had, it was definitely shielded by my complete lack of confidence. And the more you do something, the more that level of paranoia starts to decrease, and it allows you to just do whatever it is that you do unencumbered. Whether that's good enough to super compete at the highest level, it really depends, the industry, the person, etc., and your responsibilities in life. But confidence is something that sort of takes a while to be earned.
100% agree with that, and stuff I've experienced in my life. And as you say, as you fumble around, you bounce into walls and you start to figure a few things out, and you start to become more confident because you can actually predict the process and what's going to happen next because you've been down those roads so many times. But the important thing is not only you get that confidence, but then also people are looking for confidence from you. And when you have that confidence, project that confidence, people are going to feel a whole lot better about working with you.
Oh, 100%. The amount of times I went into a studio in New York, and it was a bit of, almost isn't like that anymore because everything's so remote now, but you'd go into a studio and the marketing person for the brand that you're working with is there, and a bunch of other executives are there, and PA, and they're all just sat on the sofa behind the glass, and you're in the booth doing a wacky, stupid voice, and it takes a certain amount of suspending of disbelief to just go, I'm just going to do this thing and let's hope it's okay. And then voice actors will tell you the same thing. There's a certain paranoia when you're just stood there after you've done your take, and you can see them through the glass and you can't hear them because it's soundproof. and they've got this serious look on their face and they're talking, you're like, oh God, what did I do? What did I do? Did they hate me? And then the amount of times they've come on the talk back and say, oh, sorry, Jamie, we're just ordering lunch. We'll get back to you in a sec. Hang on. They're really agonizing over what they're going to have for lunch. And you sort of have to, I think, that's the best way to build confidence, is just to, I don't want to say go through trauma. It is definitely, it beats out that level of paranoia, because you're like, there's so much I can't control. I'm imagining 90% of the horrors that are actually occurring. And that's not to say that people don't suffer horrible things, but certainly in my experience in my line of work, I've imagined much more negativity than actually existed.
And that's so normal. And the things we make up in our heads are amazing. And like you said there, 90+% of it is never going to occur. It's just something our brains are just searching for problems.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that, talking about trauma, and obviously we got to stretch ourselves to grow. And, when we stretch ourselves too fast, too quick, that's when we do experience trauma. But there's healthy stretching and growing, just like working out or even just physically stretching, right? If you stretch too far, you're going to hurt yourself. But that slow, ever increasing stretch is where the growth happens.
Absolutely. And I think I probably misspoke when I said trauma. I think more discomfort is probably a better word to use, because trauma is much more extreme. Being awkward and embarrassed in a voiceover session is not traumatic.
Right.
But yeah, discomfort and putting yourself in a difficult position. Like, one of the hardest things I ever had to do in my line of work was mocap. So you go in for a video game, for example, and you're in what's called a volume, and they put a headset on you, and they've got cameras that are filming your face, and they've got cameras around the room that are filming all your actions. And for me, I'm very cozy and comfortable in a booth with a script in front of me, but I was not bargaining on going onto a stage and interacting with other actors and having to be off book, and there's all this technical stuff that you have to consider as well. But that whole process of being super nervous, super uncomfortable, and feeling really weird in my body, and not knowing, forgetting like how to walk from A to B because it feels weird. When I got back and did voiceover, everything was like, this is a breeze. Like, everything just like was no problem. I was confident, and it was one of the best things I could do for my career, was to go super out of my comfort zone. And I learned I don't really want to do mocap again. I've done it a bunch of times, but I'll do it if necessary. But it really made me appreciate all the benefits of regular voiceover.
Yeah, going out of the comfort zone, that's so key. And it's something I've experienced in my line of work too, is, I started my business 10 plus years ago, and I'm thrown in a million different positions, literally meeting with thousands of different entrepreneurs. And yeah, I used to be really nervous walking into meetings and not knowing what I'm going to get myself into. But now, if I know I'm going into some sort of tax meeting, like, I can go in there just almost completely blind, have no idea what's going on, and still feel confident to be able to come in there and provide value and be able to guide the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's just pure experience, right?
Yeah, and confidence in your ability that no one's out to get you. And
Right.
that if you don't know something, it's not the end of the world. It's, you just say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure about that answer to that question. Let me look into it. People aren't, as a rule, out. People want to project the fact that you're competent, and they want you to be good at what you do. And like you said, all those negative thoughts are somewhat self-imposed. And the more you do something, I think, the more you just drop that paranoia. And we all live relatively cushy lives these days, right? What's the worst that can happen? A little bit of embarrassment, or a little bit of fumbling for your words, or it's really not the end of the world. And yeah, the funny thing is, the moment you start losing that paranoia, the better you get. And it's like a sort of virtuous circle. Like, the better you get, and then you're less paranoid because you're better. And it's like, but that first stage, that first hurdle to overcome, you just kind of have to, stick it out, and just keep doing it.
Yeah, and I've talked about that before, about that virtuous cycle, right? Yeah, you do something, you get a little better, so you get a little more confident, so you get even a little bit more better, and then a little more, and it just feeds on itself. Yeah. But the opposite's true too, right? Like, you get a negative thought, so you perform a little worse, and then you get more negative thoughts, and like those cycles, everything accumulates, right? It even accumulates up, or it can accumulate down. And it's obviously great to get in those virtuous cycles.
Yeah. There is no perfect life, right? You'll have periods where you do something really well, and you have things that you lie awake at night and cringe about. I mean, that's life. And I guess the things people do say, you learn from your kind of worst moments probably more than you learn from your sort of wins. And I'm getting better. I'm not great at taking the win, like, and really appreciating wins. I tend to dwell on the negatives, but I'm really trying my best to be better at that. And because otherwise you could just spend all your life, it's a multitude of things in our lives. So it's what you choose to focus on is more your reality.
Yeah. And my conversations with kind of high achievers and different entrepreneurs is, they're just, as a rule, generally terrible at celebrating wins because they're so future focused, right? And they're always, and I'm the worst at it. I had this goal I've been trying to hit for like 3 years. And I found out 2 months ago I got it.
Yeah.
And I went in and told my right-hand man, my best friend, my employee, I was like, hey, I got this. And then I just walked away. And he stopped me. He said, no, get back in there. This is a big deal. You know what I mean?
Oh, I totally relate.
It's just something I just blow right past. And I'm like, okay, what's next?
Yeah, immediately. Well, it's time to raise the bar. That's obviously didn't put the bar too high. Yeah, my wife is constantly saying, just take it in, like smell the roses or whatever it is. Yeah, it is definitely a difficult thing when you're so future focused, and it is a challenge to sit there and just be present. There are books on it, get a therapist, like all of these things are helpful, Yeah, because life can, I guess, pass you by if you're constantly just like reaching for something that's just out of reach. You're not appreciating what you have right now. And yeah, I know we're getting all philosophical here and I don't feel qualified to talk about that, but I can tell you my experience. And that is what you described is almost a day-to-day occurrence for me. Is just, I could appreciate more what I have.
So Jamie, you've had a certain level of success in different areas. What would you credit as the number one reason for that, or your skill, or why do you think you've had so much success in your area?
I think probably just doggedly sticking at the thing I'm doing. I know it sounds kind of a lame answer, but I coach people occasionally in voiceover, and the people that are successful are the ones that just keep doing it. And
that's everything.
Right, I know I have people who come in and they've got this incredible natural talent and they're brilliant. But if you don't pair that with that sort of consistency of putting in the hours and not being put off if there are setbacks, that's the dream ticket. You have talent and you have that sort of level of determination. That's perfect. But usually there's a bit of a one-sided thing. Maybe they're really determined. I'm like, maybe you should steer yourself in this direction because you've got a really niche voice, or there's something, like I say, they're really talented, but they kind of fall at the first hurdle because they're used to like getting a lot of positive feedback or something. I don't think I'm the most naturally gifted voice actor. I think that's why I started RPS, the production side, because that's the thing that I really deeply invested in and love doing for the podcasting. But from voice acting, I have done well in it, but I've been doing it for 15 years and it wasn't a meteoric rise by any stretch of the imagination, but I prefer it that way because it's got good solid foundations. Oh, don't get me wrong. I've had my moments of like self-doubt. When we were in New York and we had no money, our entertainment, my wife and I would just walk around the city. It was just such a cool place. Like, we just walk for free. We wouldn't take the subway, just walk everywhere. And my wife will tell you how much I bent her ear about how lacking in confidence I was. Oh, am I wasting my time doing this? And she was very supportive and very kind, listening to me moaning on and on. But there was many, she should have given me a slap of, a couple of times. So I think that sort of consistency and just sticking it through, even, the amount of times I wanted to throw in the towel, like, probably is why I've done well in voiceover, and I'm doing all right in podcasting too.
Yeah, I mean, the consistency is everything, right? I think around entrepreneurship and what have you, that people see successful people in their different areas and they think, oh yeah, they were just naturally talented, because I mean, like, they're looking at the finished product or a way more developed product, right? But that's not how anything works. Like, yeah, I mean, anytime you look into somebody that's an overnight success, you actually look into their past, and there's 5-10 years of doing something consistently, and they finally just hit some tipping point and exploded, right? It's not that, oh, they just appeared on the scene and they're, a huge voiceover actor, right?
And there are hidden advantages and privileges that some people have that others don't. And I would put myself in that category. I was able, admittedly, we lived in a tiny shared little room in an apartment in New York. We didn't have tons of money, but We didn't have kids. I didn't have to look after an elderly parent. I was fit and healthy. All these advantages that enable me to throw myself into it and do that. There's a lot of luck and a lot of life circumstance that contributed to that too. I remember when I was in New York, I would go to these, like when I was there, I realized at some point I'm not taking full advantage of being in the city. And I'm living as if I could be anywhere. So I'm not comfortable going to networking events. It's just not my comfort zone. But I'm like, look, just do one a week. Do one a week for a year. Try and just throw yourself in the most uncomfortable situation. And I was able to just go, okay, I want to do that, put myself in an uncomfortable position. And I learned a huge amount about communication and connecting with people and getting out of my own way and not prejudging things and what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not. But again, I was in New York City. I had the time. I had the essential ability to get there. These are all privileges that if you're in the middle of the country and you don't have access to all that stuff, it's recognize your privilege, and it is do the hard work and work where you can to improve yourself and improve your career, and good things will come from that. And then, like you say, statistically, the overnight success is, like you say, right place, right time. Daddy made a call. I could intern at the company because I didn't have any bills to pay. Like this, loads of situations where things can happen just by accident.
And it's true. Those big successes, those things come around, and we all get lucky in different ways. And it's not, a lot of those things are out of control. But the important thing is doing, like you said, the internal work and the pushing yourself.
Yeah.
So that, going to all these network events and doing all these things, that you are prepared when the opportunity shows up, right? You are ready. If you didn't do any of those things, the same situations could have came about, the same opportunities could have came about, but you wouldn't have been ready for it.
Yeah. I just met people I never would have met otherwise. And maybe it's funny when you look back at how, certain things have happened and you look back at the circuitous path with which you got there, you're like, wow, if I trace it all the way back, if I didn't go to that one thing, like I wouldn't have met that person. And then that person introduced me, and putting yourself out in the world. It's funny how things can have a sort of butterfly effect later on. And when you are in it for the long haul, you start to notice those little things coming back to you. And you're like, oh, wow, I sent that email like in 2010, and maybe this guy could help me, blah, blah, blah. And, the amount of times that's happened through any of the direct marketing that I've done over the years, and something come back to me and I see my email from like a different decade.
Yeah, but it's in, like you said, it's all planting seeds, right? It's just planting all these seeds. You have no idea what the future is going to hold, or any of those seeds are ever going to turn into anything. If you don't plant the seeds, you're definitely not going to have anything.
Sure. Yeah.
So you just got to plant them all and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it is throwing shit at the wall, right, to see what sticks. I mean, it's a crude way of putting it, but I mean, I've spent my whole life doing that. It's finding your lane. Yeah, I don't know. I think these days, you mentioned it earlier, having skill and blah, 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 but everyone's skilled in something, multiple things. Yep. Most people are skilled in multiple things. I always think about like The Voice or something like that, or American Idol or something, and they're all great singers, but Broadway is full of great singers and dancers and actors. Like it's not that special to be talented in something, but what can separate you is, like we're talking about, and not to flog a dead horse, but it is putting in those hours and doing that extra amount of work that will separate you, and consistently over time. And I don't believe in beating yourself to death and putting in 14 hours a day just for the sake of it. And you're going to burn out, and you're not going to be able to sustain that. And it's not good for your relationships, not good for your health, et cetera, et cetera. But really over time, consistency is the key across the industries that I've worked in. And it does tie into what we were talking about at first. You do desensitize yourself to paranoia. I am able now to come on a podcast and just chat with you and not worry about the fact there's an audience and people may be judging me. Well, they definitely will. That's the nature of podcasting. Yeah. But it is what it is. You put yourself out in the world, and, you hopefully you can just be honest and a human being, and then that's all you can do. And getting out of your own way has been a learning process for me.
Jamie, if you can go back, from your perspective today, what piece of advice would you give yourself? So, you just arrived in New York City, brand new, don't know anybody. What would you tell yourself?
When I moved to New York, I felt this huge sense of liberation because I was from a small town in the UK, and I wouldn't change that person at that time because I immediately landed in the city and was just like, oh God, no one's seeing what I'm doing. I'm completely anonymous, and that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't probably change that. But in general, maybe I'd go earlier in my journey and in my 20s or something and just relax, turn down the brain. I think until I started putting in some work to actually focus my thoughts a little bit. And I do a thing called morning pages. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
Tell us about that.
It's from a book called The Artist's Way. Very, very artistic. And it's the antithesis of where I am, which is why the book's so good for me, because I can be a little on the cynical side, a little on the sort of woo, oh, I'm not interested. But the morning pages, you're just vomiting out your thoughts. And so you write it down on paper, or I got this little like board where you use a stylus and you just press a button and it deletes it. But you spend 10, 20 minutes every day just automatic writing, essentially. And it is astonishing how good that is for my mental state over time, because you realize quite how many random thoughts you creep in and all these worries and concerns that you have. And it's almost like I equate it to when you have a nightmare and you talk it out. And the moment you verbalize it, it loses all its power, because most of the time they're ridiculous, right? So it feels similar to that. And I've found that it's really helped me to sort of order my thoughts a little more and to be less chaotic mentally. And so, yeah, I would say to my early self, do morning pages as early as possible, and maybe you won't be quite as nuts.
Yeah, no, and I've recently, I would say, maybe 3 months ago, started a journaling type activity myself. And it's really just like a couple times a week, I have thinking times, what it's called. I sat there with a journal for 20, 30 minutes or however long it goes. And it's really just to sit there, try to shut my brain off and pay attention to what like pops in, right? And just write it down. And it is amazing, like all these things that are running through your head that you may not even realize, or you don't slow down enough to actually process it or take it in, and how much those things can be affecting you. And also like just the great ideas that pop in your head that maybe now that you've written down and focused on it, you could maybe even go execute on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've all of the above for me.
And it helps me be a little less neurotic.
That's good. Good for my wife. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a sort of discipline. And there are definitely days I'm like, oh, I can't be bothered. But those are the days when you really need it, right? Because, just wake up 10 minutes earlier and just do it. Just don't even think about it. Just sit down, have a cup of coffee or whatever, and just write. There are no rules. You just write. And if you find yourself not writing, you're not doing the task. You can literally talk about, oh my God, why am I not writing that right now? Just write. And you learn your thinking patterns a little bit. And with a lot of things, awareness is the first step, right, to progression. So I would recommend for myself and for other people to try morning pages and try the book. It does feel a little artsy fartsy, right? But if you're not that minded, which I'm not, it's a good mindset to break you out of rigid thinking and harsh judgmental thinking.
I'm an analytical type guy, an accountant and what have you. And some of those kind of things, especially younger days, like if it's not practical and concrete and whatever, that, things seem a little woo to me or whatever, right? But, I've gotten to the point now where I have a visualization, which is like a 8x10, a normal piece of paper, front and back. And I read that thing every single morning. It takes about 10 minutes. And on that piece of paper, it talks about everything that's important to me and what I stand for and what I believe. And then also on the backside, it has all my goals and everything I want to accomplish and how I'm going to do it and how I'm going to measure it and hold myself accountable to it. And it's amazing when you start repeatedly reading that stuff to you, how your brain starts to look for those opportunities and starts getting a whole lot of clarity that you lacked before you started doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I would say that I would recognize the same thing. The clarity is the big one. And I think for those listening that are like dismissive of this, it's not going to be for everyone, for sure. But I would ask yourself, why are you so dismissive? Is that not a little clue into the fact that you're maybe not quite as open-minded as you thought you were? I was that way. My wife was encouraging me with this, and she was like, why are you so hesitant to do this? Are you scared of something? I was like, no, it just feels like a waste of time, defensive, And that is interesting information. It's a data point for yourself. I am resistant to this. Why is that?
Like I said, always a little resistant to that kind of stuff. But what helped me a ton was getting around people that I wanted to be like and that were doing stuff like this. And I see how successful it is for them. And it's like, whoa, what excuse do I have now? Yeah. I have these people that I'm trying to emulate and they're doing it and they say it's awesome. So what's your problem?
Well, I know. Some of the greatest thinkers on earth are meditators, right? And are really into all that kind of stuff, which... Yeah. I think that's sort of a next step for me. I still don't understand what it is exactly, but
I've dabbled.
Oh yeah,
I've dabbled.
You tell me, what is it?
Yeah, it's so hard, especially I guess for my personality or what have you, where it's to just stop. You know what I mean? To stop for long enough to get value out of that. Yeah, I'm just, I guess, a wild animal that needs a lot more training.
Well, is it like when you go on vacation, you come back all kind of fired up because you've had that rest? It's giving yourself a little mini vacation. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and that's true. I would agree with that comment. Something's certainly an area that I got to get better at.
Well, there we go. Every day is a learning day.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Well, Jamie, we've had a great conversation here. What's the best way people can connect with you or work with you, or what's the best way people can get in touch with you?
Well, if you're interested in starting or working on a podcast, you can go to my website, rps-audio.com. That's my new company, and I help people to create websites, launch websites, and create podcasts, launch podcasts, and grow them and meet the audience that they want to connect with. For my voiceover work, you can find me at Jamie Muffett. That's 2 F's and 2 T's in Muffett, vo.com, jamiemuffettvo.com. And I'm on the socials and the usual places.
Very cool. Jamie, I appreciate you coming on today. We love the British voiceover. That's fantastic.
Well,
it's always so soothing. I love
You're welcome. I didn't really do anything to earn it. There it is.
Yeah, there you go. You like you said in the beginning, you got to work with what your mama gave
Exactly.
you, right?
Thanks so much, Peyton. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Absolutely, guys. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you found it valuable, please rate, review, and share it. That is the best way to help us build this and reach more people, as we're trying to accomplish our goal of help creating more healthy, wealthy, and wise entrepreneurs. You can follow us on social media by searching for me, Peyton Squires, or going to PeytonSquires.com. On the website and social media, we're always sharing tips of personal growth, and there we can actually interact. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.